Civilizations rarely collapse because they lack power. More often, they collapse because power grows without restraint. History repeats this pattern again and again. A society begins with strong principles. Authority exists within limits. Leaders remain accountable. Wealth is present, but it is balanced by responsibility. Then prosperity arrives. Power expands. Influence grows. And gradually, the limits disappear. Leaders accumulate more resources. Military strength increases. Courts become more luxurious. Authority concentrates in fewer hands. What once began as leadership slowly transforms into domination. This pattern has appeared throughout history. Empires often rise through discipline and decline through excess. Rome's early republic valued restraint among its leaders, yet later emperors ruled through spectacle and enormous wealth. Egyptian pharaohs built treasuries that symbolized unlimited authority. Medieval kings measured power through armies and extravagant courts. Power without limits tends to expand until it destabilizes the system that created it. Long before modern political philosophy began studying this pattern, the Hebrew scriptures addressed it directly. The Torah established a rule that was unusual for the ancient world. Even kings had limits. This rule appears in the book of Deuteronomy, in a passage describing the responsibilities of Israel's future rulers. And the instruction is short and easy to overlook, yet it contains a remarkable insight about leadership and human nature. Deuteronomy 17:16-17 states, "Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold." The passage outlines three restrictions: horses, wives, silver and gold. And at first glance, these instructions may appear simple, even strange. But when viewed within the historical environment of the ancient Near East, they reveal a sophisticated philosophy of leadership. The rule addresses three forms of accumulation that threaten the stability of power: military strength, political alliances, and economic wealth. Each restriction reflects a deep understanding of human behavior. The first instruction concerns horses. The king must not multiply horses for himself. And in the modern world, horses appear harmless, but in the ancient world they represented military technology. Horses powered chariots, which functioned as the most advanced weapons of warfare in that era. Empires dominated battlefields through chariot armies. Egypt, in particular, was famous for its powerful chariot forces. Horses were imported, trained, and used to build military dominance. A king who gathered many horses was not merely collecting animals. He was assembling military power. Military strength carries psychological risks. Leaders who possess overwhelming force may begin relying on power rather than wisdom. Authority shifts from persuasion to coercion. The Torah anticipates this danger. Military capability may exist, but it must remain limited. The verse even warns against sending people back to Egypt to acquire horses. Egypt was the primary supplier of war horses, and dependence on Egypt would gradually reshape national priorities. A military expansion would begin defining leadership. The Torah quietly resists this possibility. Leadership must remain disciplined. Power must not grow simply because expansion is possible. The second restriction concerns wives. The king must not acquire many wives, lest his heart turn away. In ancient royal culture, marriages rarely functioned as private relationships. They served as political agreements. Kings married daughters of foreign rulers to secure alliances between kingdoms. Each marriage strengthened diplomatic ties. But these alliances also introduced new influences. Foreign princesses often arrived with advisors, servants, and cultural expectations. As marriages multiplied, competing interests entered the royal court. The king found himself balancing multiple loyalties. A ruler connected to many foreign families might hesitate to confront certain kingdoms. Political marriages created obligations that complicated leadership decisions. And the Torah summarizes this danger with a simple phrase, "Lest his heart turn away." In Hebrew, thought the heart represented the center of judgment and decision-making. A king influenced by too many alliances might lose clarity. His decisions could serve diplomacy rather than justice. Leadership requires independence of judgment. The Torah therefore establishes a limit. Political alliances must remain restrained so that leadership remains focused. The third restriction concerns wealth. Nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. This instruction is perhaps the most surprising. Ancient kings were expected to accumulate wealth. Royal treasuries symbolized authority and success. Kingdoms measured prosperity by the gold stored within palace walls. Yet the Torah introduces a boundary. A king must not gather excessive wealth. This command does not reject prosperity itself. Jewish tradition never condemns wealth outright. Many respected figures in biblical history possessed property and resources. But the text identifies a danger when wealth accumulates without limits. Excess changes motivation. A ruler with enormous personal wealth may begin protecting his fortune rather than serving his people. Decisions become influenced by privilege rather than responsibility. Leadership gradually shifts from stewardship to possession. History provides many examples of this transformation. Leaders begin with noble intentions. Yet once wealth becomes central to their authority, governance changes. Power becomes a tool for maintaining advantage. The Torah anticipates this pattern. So it establishes a financial boundary at the highest level of leadership. Even kings must practice restraint. This rule reflects a broader principle within Hebrew law. Authority always carried limits. Judges were accountable to legal standards. Priests had defined responsibilities. Prophets were expected to speak truth rather than pursue influence. No individual existed above the law. Even the king remained subject to the Torah. This principle distinguished Israelite leadership from many surrounding monarchies. In neighboring civilizations, kings often stood beyond legal accountability. Pharaohs were treated as divine rulers. Mesopotamian kings exercised near absolute power over their territories. The Hebrew tradition rejected this structure. And the king was not above the law, he lived under it. In fact, Deuteronomy contains another command reinforcing this idea. The king must write his own copy of the Torah and read it regularly. This instruction ensured that power remained connected to wisdom. A leader surrounded by wealth and praise gradually loses perspective. Scripture served as a constant reminder that authority existed for responsibility, not personal expansion. And the three restrictions in Deuteronomy form a unified philosophy. Military power must remain limited. Political alliances must remain measured. Economic wealth must remain restrained. Together, they create a system designed to prevent greed. Greed rarely appears suddenly. It grows slowly. Small privileges become advantages. Advantages become expectations. Eventually, excess feels normal. The rule interrupts this process before it begins. By limiting accumulation early, and it prevents power from expanding uncontrollably. This preventative approach appears throughout Jewish legal tradition. The goal is not merely to punish corruption after it appears. The goal is to prevent the conditions that allow corruption to grow. Restraint must exist before temptation arrives. Otherwise, discipline becomes difficult. The biblical narrative itself provides an example of what happens when these limits disappear. King Solomon offers a striking case. Solomon began his reign with remarkable wisdom. He built the temple in Jerusalem and expanded trade networks across the region. Under his leadership, Israel experienced prosperity. Yet the same narrative records something else. Solomon accumulated enormous wealth. He imported horses from Egypt and maintained a vast royal court. He also entered many political marriages. Gold flowed into Jerusalem in extraordinary quantities. Luxury increased. The royal court became increasingly elaborate. And at first, these developments appeared harmless. Prosperity often disguises its dangers. But over time, the burdens of royal expansion increased. Political alliances complicated loyalties. Economic pressures grew. After Solomon's death, the United Kingdom fractured. The earlier command in Deuteronomy suddenly appears prophetic. The limits placed on kings were not theoretical. They were preventative. They existed to protect leadership from the temptations that Solomon encountered. And yet, like many rules designed to preserve stability, they were gradually forgotten. This forgetting reveals something about human nature. Restrictions that limit power are rarely popular among those who possess it. During periods of prosperity, limits feel unnecessary. They appear inconvenient. Gradually, they are ignored. Only later, when instability appears, does their purpose become clear. And the Hebrew legal tradition attempted to prevent this cycle by placing limits where power was strongest. At the top, because leadership shapes the behavior of society, citizens observe their rulers. If leaders pursue excess, excess becomes cultural. If leaders practice restraint, restraint becomes normal. The tone of leadership spreads downward. Modern societies sometimes reverse this principle. Ordinary citizens face strict regulations, while powerful institutions accumulate enormous authority. The Torah approaches the problem differently. Those with the greatest power must accept the strongest limits, because their decisions influence everyone else. Leadership therefore requires greater discipline. The higher the position, the stronger the boundaries must become. This philosophy explains why Jewish ethical literature frequently emphasizes humility among leaders. Humility is not weakness, it is awareness. Awareness that power can distort judgment. Without humility, authority becomes insulated from correction. History shows the dangers of such insulation. Empires collapse under excess. Financial systems fail when leaders ignore restraint. Institutions decay when power detaches from accountability. The rule in Deuteronomy attempts to prevent these outcomes before they begin. It establishes the principle of self-limiting leadership. A ruler who restricts his own accumulation demonstrates discipline, and discipline produces trust. Trust stabilizes societies. When citizens believe their leaders act for the common good, social order becomes stronger. But when leaders pursue wealth and privilege without limits, trust disappears. Once trust collapses, rebuilding it becomes extremely difficult. The Torah's solution is simple but demanding. Set limits early. Apply them even to the highest authority, and maintain them consistently. This approach reflects a deeper insight found throughout Jewish wisdom literature. Restraint preserves freedom. Without restraint, power eventually becomes destructive. With restraint, power becomes sustainable. The forgotten Hebrew rule about kings accumulating wealth expresses this idea clearly. Greed cannot be eliminated entirely, but it can be restrained. And sometimes the most effective restraint is not punishment after corruption occurs. It is limitation before temptation begins. Even kings must accept boundaries, because power without discipline eventually destabilizes society. And the most enduring form of leadership is not the one that accumulates the most power. It is the one that knows when to stop,